Hello, and thanks for watching The Highway to Heroin. I'm Mary Elizabeth Elliott with CADCA. Numbers from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health show in recent years more people are starting to use heroin. Anecdotal reports say previous addiction to prescription painkillers may be leading people down this road. No matter what is driving people to use heroin, the results can be deadly. Many areas in the country are seeing an increase in deaths because of heroin overdoses. 3 leaders are with me today to talk about how we can hopefully slow down the speed on this highway to heroin. Dr. Mark Fishman is an addiction psychiatrist and is the medical director of Maryland Treatment Centers. He is seeing more patients entering treatment for heroin addiction. Lisa Roberts is a public health nurse and coalition leader from Scioto County, Ohio. She successfully worked to close down the pill mills in her area and is now working to control a heroin problem. Harold Rochon has spent his career with the Detroit Police Department and has risen to the rank of inspector. Cops like Harold are seeing more and more heroin on the streets. Well, welcome everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here. This is an important topic. And we're going to start off with something really simple. So what is heroin? Mark?
Well, heroin is a very highly purified form of the drug class we call opioids or opiates. It's very addictive, partly because it's short-acting and people have to take it very frequently, and partly because it's so potent and so powerful.
And how does it compare with other drugs as far as the addictive potential?
Well, heroin is among the most addictive drugs we know, but it's comparable to the prescription opioids you may have heard of, the Vicodins, the oxycodones, the OxyContins, the Percocets, but in a highly potent form that's often taken by injection.
Okay. Harold, you're out on the streets and you're seeing this firsthand. So what are some of the different types of heroin that law enforcement is seeing out there?
What we're seeing most is the black tar heroin and the brown powder heroin is what we're seeing most in the Michigan area.
And so do these different types of heroin appear all in one place, or are we seeing patterns in the country, different areas have different heroin?
I think we're seeing probably different areas in the country. You're seeing different types of heroin. Whatever they have the easiest access to is what you're going to see, and whatever cheapest is what you're going to see. And again, what the substance abuser wants more is what you're going to see.
So what the market
is asking
demanding
for is what you're going to see.
Yeah. And Lisa, let's bring you into this. In Ohio, what types of heroin, or what are you seeing there in your community?
Well, originally we had a rather severe opiate prescription problem because we had pill mills and a very high distribution rate of those things. Following that, we initially saw powder heroin that originates from Asia. And it wasn't until very recently that we saw an infusion of black tar heroin.
So you're seeing that well. So Harold, tell us a little bit more about what is happening on the streets in terms of, is this heroin pure or is it mixed with something? Or what are you seeing?
Well, when it originally gets to the distributor, it's probably as pure as it's going to get. Then as it's broken down into, it's mixed with other different things. Depends on who's selling it, and depends on the quality of the heroin, what the heroin addict wants. One of the things that's interesting is that the more potent it is, and they don't send it out as potent as it could be initially. It starts out kind of weak, and then it gradually increases based upon the substance abuser, if I can call him a substance abuser. We call him something else, but the substance abuser, his desire. And also, what I want to do is I want him to want it bad. So I'm going to increase the amount of purity slowly, and so he wants more. I want him to keep coming to me because the doc, for example, may be selling the same thing, but it may be a weaker dose or slightly weaker dose. And so if he comes to me, I'm gonna find out. I'm going to find out what the doc is selling. I'm going to find out how strong it is, and I'm going to up mine just a little bit so that individual will come to me as opposed to going to the doc or going somewhere else.
Yeah. So guys, how are people taking heroin?
Well, one of the trends that contributes to the explosion of heroin addiction in this country, especially in young people, is this historical trend towards increased purity. Over the last 30 years, the purity of street heroin has really rapidly increased. 30 years ago, 2%, 3%, 5% would have been what dealers were selling, and at that level of purity, injection was a must to be able to get efficient high, to get use. And if you sniffed it, if you used it nasally, if you snorted it, it'd be pretty much a waste to an experienced drug user. But over the past 20, 30 years, as potencies and percentage purity has increased to where we now see 40, 50, 60, even 80% pure heroin being sold on the streets, if you sniff it, if you snort it, well, that's a perfectly efficient way to catch a habit, to get high, to get addicted, and then only later progress to injection use. So whereas previously kids might have been put off by this barrier of using a needle, of injection use, now sniffing it doesn't seem quite so off-putting to kids, and that's a method of introduction. Then some of them later progress to injection use, but both are deadly.
And one thing that's interesting that he said, the more pure, and the way I put it is, if it could kill you, that's what I want. I want it as strong as my body can stand. And I want it to last as long as my body can stand it. And that's what's driving, which is crazy to me, that's driving some of the young people to use it more, right, or drawn to the more potent. That's what I want. When they were injecting fentanyl with some of these drugs, people were running, some of the substance abusers were running to the person selling the fentanyl or mixing the drug with the fentanyl because it was more deadly. Who could figure? To me, if it's going to kill me, why am I doing it?
So why are they doing it? Let's talk about that. So what does it really do to the user, Mark?
So all the opiates, including heroin, work on brain receptors called the opioid receptor. And so we have throughout our bodies and in our brains opiate receptors and a natural messenger called enkephalins or endorphins that fit into that opiate receptor in a natural system that helps regulate emotion and reward in our body. Now, why did God give us an opiate receptor and inborn opiates? Presumably not so that we could be better heroin addicts, but having to do with built-in systems of reward, built-in systems of pain relief, built-in systems of mood regulation. But the pharmacological opiates, the OxyContins and especially the heroines, are thousands of times more potent, more strong than the natural enkephalins, and they hijack that system like a sledgehammer, and they're just massively addictive. And the reward and the pull and the sense of euphoria and what we call addiction overtakes a user relatively rapidly.
And what is the term, when we hear the term dope sick? Because we sometimes hear that term. Lisa, you can share with your experience with people. What does that really mean?
Well, when people become dependent physically on opioids, they need that drug just to not become ill. And so when they don't get the drug, they call it dope sick, and it's basically a physical withdrawal. There's also a psychological withdrawal as well. But they become very ill. They hurt all over, their legs hurt, they have profuse diarrhea, profuse vomiting, their skin crawls, they have extreme anxiety. And it's a miserable, horrible feeling, and it can go on for days. And so when they're in that state, all it takes to get rid of it is more of that drug. And so often they relapse and they do it, and they can't get through those withdrawals.
And that's exactly right. So one of the features of heroin addiction is both this euphoria that people chase initially, the pleasure, the feeling high, but the later stages of opiate addiction, people are really just sometimes trying to get well and avoiding that withdrawal. So one of the things that makes opiates, including heroin, so massively addictive is this negative reinforcement of avoiding withdrawal and people just using to keep from feeling sick.
So how is heroin and the prescription painkillers, how are they similar or different? Can we just talk a little bit about that on a molecular level?
Well, physiologically, they work the same. They operate at exactly the same receptors. Their physiology is precisely the same. It's really just about the source. the prescription opioids come from doctors' prescriptions and get diverted or misused. We flooded the market with this recent increase in treating every pain with an opioid. And although those are good tools for legitimately treating pain, the unintended side effect, the unintended consequence, is that it's available for diversion and misuse. But heroin works the same way. One of the things that varies from opiate to opiate is the duration of use. So an OxyContin, which might have a longer duration compared to a heroin, which only lasts 4 or 5 days, heroin people have to chase a dose several times a day, and experienced users might be using 4, 5, 6 times a day to avoid getting sick. It becomes a full-time occupation chasing the drug.
And can the brain tell the difference?
Essentially not.
No.
And one of the things we're finding is, in talking to some of the drug addicts, is that they'll take the pills if they can't get the heroin. While they're waiting to get the heroin, they'll take the pills, and then they go ahead and use the heroin. Something else that intrigued me that I just recently found out is that when people who are addicted to heroin, they start to use heroin to become normal, so they can function normally. We in Michigan, I was working a case, and there were people that would come in the morning, 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning, on their way to work, to buy heroin and then go to work and be normal persons, and that really surprised me when I found that out.
So that's right. So early on, you might not know who's addicted because they might be hiding it, restoring their normal function, avoiding getting sick, but have enough functional reserve to carry on until their addiction proceeds to the point where they fall apart.
Yeah, that is really important understanding for the community. And now that we've learned a little bit more about what heroin is, let's see how people in one county have banded together to deal with this increasing problem.
Heroin is up and coming. For the past 2 years now, we've seen a huge increase in the amounts of heroin that we're purchasing and seizing out on the streets. We're seeing brown heroin and also black tar. More so the brown. All walks of life. Everybody's using heroin. There's no boundaries on heroin today. You find it in your poorest and your richest communities. It's everywhere.
As in many parts of the country, the Cleveland, Ohio area is seeing tragic consequences for some of the people who smoke, shoot, or snort heroin.
The numbers tell the story. In 2007, we had 40 individuals who died as a result of heroin, either by itself or in combination with other drugs. What we notice at the end of 2011 is that number's up to 107. For 2012, we're almost to the end of the year. Our projection is the number's going to be somewhere in the high 150s, 160 range. That's a 4-fold increase. That's very dramatic for any one drug in isolation. I can't help these poor individuals who've already died and come here. But what I really wanted to do was to ring the bell that this is a serious problem. The people who've come here, that's it. They've played their whole hand down. And what I want to do as a public health officer is, kind of take their sad experience and maybe, intervene with somebody further up the road so they don't drive the train all the way to the last stop and crash.
So with the desire to stop the deaths from heroin, the medical examiner sounded an alarm.
This is a public health emergency, so I started to reach out to people in public health and say, are you aware of this? Are you, looking at this? Have you seen this trend? And I think that one of the people who I reached out to was the head of the opiate task force.
We always focus on fatalities. Everything's focused on fatalities. But when you look at it from a public health perspective, for that one fatality, there's a percentage of people that are in treatment. There's a percentage of people that went to the emergency room. And it's sad, because nobody just starts out going out for heroin. Heroin is not a recreational drug. In many cases, going from one to the other, I don't know if it's necessarily to get high anymore, but to get off the dope sickness that's associated with addiction to the prescription pain pills.
Heroin is cheaper than prescription opiates and often easier to get, especially after May 2011 when Ohio began cracking down on prescription painkillers.
In many cases, what we actually have seen over the past couple of years is, as we've kind of addressed certain issues with the pill mills, people that were addicted had no other way to go. They needed to find some other fix, which eventually is heroin.
So putting the squeeze on the pills is inadvertently causing an increase in heroin use.
So when you're talking about the heroin and prescription opiate problem, when you're in a place that has a plentiful prescription opiate supply, you know, the prescription opiates are up here and the heroin is down here. When you push down on the prescription opiates, it's going to pop up. The heroin's going to pop up. When you push down on the heroin, the prescription opiates are going to pop up. It's kind of like the whack-a-mole game. So that's what's going to happen. As you push down on one, the other one's going to pop up.
At one time, the Opiate Task Force just focused on prescription drugs. Now its role has expanded. Cuyahoga County is now trying to tackle all opiate abuse, whether it is the abuse of legal painkillers used in an illegal way or illicit heroin.
I mean, we're trying to stay ahead of the curve if we can. The problem is certainly very big and overwhelming sometimes, but you know, you got to do what you can. That's one of the nice things here is we do have a lot of partnerships already formed, and we've known about the opiate epidemic since at least 2007. So we were already gearing up for that. So we already have the infrastructure in place to deal with, you know, sort of the next thing that comes along, which is nice. I mean, we got prevention at the table, we got law enforcement, we got treatment, we got public health. All four of those branches are at the table.
As far as educating the public is concerned, the members of the task force have their work cut out for them. Many people don't seem to think heroin use could happen to them or to their kids.
And we know from talking to kids, from having discussions with kids, asking them, could you ever imagine that you would use heroin? And they say, no, I would never use heroin. When you then ask, but 18% of our kids report using a prescription drug, a pain medicine, in the past year that was not prescribed to them. That's where we're finding the gap, is that the misconception and the misunderstanding of the link between taking a prescription drug, an opioid, and then developing an addiction on this end, and then turning to heroin because it's cheaper, because they can't get the prescription drug anymore to feed the addiction. I just don't think that people understand addiction to prescription drugs and that link and how quickly that can happen.
The heroin epidemic in the Cuyahoga County area isn't just an inner-city problem. The black outline on the map is the city of Cleveland. The darker areas are outside the city limits, but still in the county. The darker the color on the map, the more deaths in that area.
People are dying out in the suburbs, and they're using drugs in the suburbs. It's not like they're pouring into the city to buy drugs, using them there, and dying them there. That would be a complete misconception.
It's a misconception that could be deadly.
There are several cities that have blinders, and they see what they want to see, but the truth of the matter is our unit goes everywhere in this county, and we can find it wherever it is. And there are no boundaries to heroin. It's everywhere.
Wow, so learned a lot from that piece, especially whack-a-mole game. I think that was a great example. What are some of your thoughts about what you just saw?
Well, it's a very poignant story. You heard that 10 to 15% of our youth are using prescription opioids. The good news is perhaps we'll be curtailing that as we cut down and we find treatment approaches and public health approaches to reduce that. But with that, we can expect, I think, rise in heroin use. The good news compared to that 10 to 15% with prescription opioids, good news is that only, say, 1%, 1.5% of 10th and 12th graders have used heroin. But the bad news is that 1% of high school students have used heroin. So it's a big problem, and it's only getting worse.
Lisa, that's your home state, and you know it well. What are your thoughts about that? What are your thoughts about the tape?
Well, it is true that it's like a game of whack-a-mole, and for the last 10 years, Southern Ohio has been the hot spot for the prescription opioid problem, including my county was the epicenter. And so, due to some really strict laws, a very proactive governor, and a lot of action, we really squeezed in Southern Ohio but like what they're saying is that it just has bulged in northern Ohio. And I did want to add that what she said is true. There is a definite link between the prescription opioids and the transition to heroin, because I've been a public health nurse for 28 years, and 28 years ago we had about 2 heroin addicts in my county, which is a rural county, very southern Ohio. They had actually developed their heroin addiction in an urban metropolitan area and moved to my county. Now, because we had this proliferation of pain clinics, we have had tremendous doses of opioid prescription drugs dispensed within our county. We have literally hundreds of heroin addicts. And the reason I know this is because the transition is true, because when we began our needle exchange program about 2 years ago, 100% of those syringe exchangers were oxycodone addicts, prescription oxycodone addicts. And about half of those people developed their addiction through a legitimate prescription from a doctor because of an injury. Now, with the drying up of the opioid pain medications in southern Ohio and the consequent bulging in northern Ohio, virtually all of those people have transitioned to heroin.
Yeah. Harold, you're in law enforcement. You see the difference between, is there a difference in the approach for law enforcement between heroin and the prescription opioids?
Well, prescriptions are legal. You have a prescription, that's legal. You don't have a prescription for pure heroin. One of the things that interests me, and I'm listening, is that people tend to think that heroin is just in the urban community, and it is not. From an economic perspective, people who live in the suburbs generally have health insurance and they have health care. A lot of people in the urban community do not. I'm talking about the substance abusers. So if I get prescription, I go to the doctor and they give me a prescription, I just run out. I'll go to the urban city where they believe that all the heroin is being manufactured and everything else, and I'll get the heroin there. Well, what's happening is the people who live in the suburbs are coming into the city to get heroin. Well, if I'm living in the urban community, I know where my money is going to be made. I'm going to set up something in the suburban community that appears the exact same way it is in the urban community, and I'm going to get some of the suburbanites to come in and get the heroin, take it out there and sell it. I don't have to go out there. They can go out there and they can sell it. So the access to the heroin is easy all the way around, urban and suburban. What bothers me sometimes is it doesn't become a problem until it affects the suburban community. It's not been a major problem. Maybe for what the doctor says because he's been doing it a long time. Maybe where Lisa says she's been doing it a long time. But from where I'm sitting, we're finding a lot more heroin now. But it's not just an urban problem. It's a all-around problem.
Right, it's our problem. And they talked about blinders, and with coalitions, of course, we always say that the most important thing is to gather local data and really find out what's going on. And working with law enforcement, you can certainly do that. Something else they talked about was sort of the risks. There was a lot of discussion about overdose. So, Mark, let's talk a little bit about sort of the risks of heroin use, and one of them is obviously overdose.
Yeah, the biggest risk for opioids, and especially heroin, is overdose, and overdoses are often fatal. They cause you to stop breathing by a direct respiratory depression effect on the brain. And people aren't always as good as they think they are about calculating dose. So they take a little too much, and the margin between that sweet spot, which addicts think is enough, and too much, is very narrow. And so it's very easy to die from a heroin overdose.
The other thing they talked about was partnerships, and how important is it to really get your hands around this problem if you don't have partnerships. And Lisa, as a coalition leader, how key are those in your community?
Well, the partnerships are very key, and it was interesting to hear her describe her partnerships, because she has the very same partnerships that we initially started out with. We called them the Big Four. It was public health, addictions, law enforcement, and the healthcare community. And from that, the coalition grew. And so I think it's really, really important also to have citizens involved in your coalition, because this is going to have to be, if you have a problem like this, it's going to have to be solved from the inside out. We ended up with some federal imposition when we had pain clinic raids and the places were closed down and the criminals have been indicted, but now it's up to us locally to fight this and to sustain this success. And only the citizens can help you do that.
Absolutely, and that's why coalitions are so important. Harold, let's think about really the costs associated. You know, this is ultimately about money, right, for the drug dealer. And so what is the cost? How do the costs compare on the street between heroin and prescription drugs?
An OxyContin pill or a pill of Vicodin can range from $5 to $25, depending upon who you're selling it to and how bad they want it. Heroin ranges from $10 up to $25 for that little bitty piece of powder that's in that little bitty piece of paper. It ranges depending upon who's buying it. I'm going to make more money in the suburbs than I am in the urban city. One of the things, another thing that we're finding that was also in the piece was the death rate. In the urban setting, you're going to find more older people dying. Because that's where they live, and they've been on heroin for a very long time. In a suburban setting, we find that there are more younger people that are dying, especially now because they don't have as the doc said, there's that little thin line between hitting the sweet spot, you know, and too much or not enough. They don't have the wherewithal to make it right because they haven't been doing it for a very long time. So I find that a lot of young people are dying who have been using drugs for a very long time because they're trying to get as high as possible, and they're trying to let that high last a whole lot longer. So I'm going to make more money in the suburbs than I am in the urban city.
But so it is less expensive. Heroin is less expensive. It varies probably from community, but it is less expensive than prescription pills.
Yeah, and that's
generally.
part of the motivation of transition for some people who get addicted to prescription pills. At some point they need it, and then it's cheaper to be able to get their habit satisfied with heroin. So they make that transition, even though they may have said earlier, oh, I'll never get to heroin. Then they're stuck.
They find themselves there. So do you guys see this as cyclical? Like drug problems being cyclical, or we can see I remember the heroin chic of the 90s, or you know, does this come around in that way, or is this particular time different?
Well, this is part of that trend. This is part of that trend. Remember, the demographic that is fueling this epidemic, where the growth is, both in prescription opioid addiction and in heroin addiction, is in young people. It's both adolescents under the 18 and young adults between 18 and 25 that really are the preponderance of the growth in the new initiates. And that is, I think, the heritage that's left us from heroin chic, the lowering prices of heroin, and the increased purity that are all fueling this.
And the internet.
It helps too.
You know, and understanding it a lot more, finding places to buy it, and just the mere fact of trying to get high and trying to use all these different things to get high. You want to get high, you can go on the internet and you can find it. And then what's easier? I can go get some heroin because it's easy. It's fast. I know where to get it. I know somebody who gets high off of it, and I know where to get it.
You know, access and availability is one of the most important factors that coalitions look at to try to really address and prevent drug abuse in the community. They really look at access and availability. So, you know, we've had these prescription drug monitoring programs, and I'm wondering if you all think that that has made it harder, has been in some ways effective and made it harder for people to get their hands on prescription painkillers.
I don't think so from where I'm sitting, because now everyone's involved. It's about the money. If I have a prescription for Vicodin and I'm getting a 90-day supply, and I don't really need it as much, I'm going to sell 50% of those Vicodin pills. So, and I'm going to sell it to kids. And we're finding more seniors that get these prescriptions are selling them, a portion of them, to people who are drug addicts.
Well, for sure, diversion is a major source, but we're hoping that the prescription drug monitoring programs and also medical education and other kinds of initiatives will at least get doctors to help reduce the supply and stop flooding the supply chain with people who don't necessarily need such high potency and high quantities of opiates, and hopefully over time that'll change. But there will still be the issue of diversion, and there will still be people who run pill mills and who do the wrong thing.
Yeah, well, perfect. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll talk more about what we can do about heroin in our community and what treatment options are available.
About the dangers of prescription drug abuse. The partnership at drugfree.org.
Welcome back to Highway to Heroin. Let's talk a little bit more, guys, on what we can do about this problem. And one of the things we need to do is get a handle on it, and that's, of course, working with law enforcement. So to understand a little bit more about where heroin is coming from, Harold.
A lot of the heroin is coming from all of the heroin is coming from outside the country, and it's shipped into the country many different means: boats, planes, trains, whatever. A lot of it ends up initially in the urban setting, and then it expands out to different parts of the state, the city, and the county, and the country. There are some organizations that are involved, and sometimes it takes, I always say, it takes more than one person to handle a drug deal, and it does. So it'll come from one person that buys it for $500, and then the next person buys it for $1,000, the next person buys it for $5,000, the next person buys it till it gets up to a kilo of cocaine, which is around $100,000 plus in this country.
So are we talking about gangs?
Some gangs, organizations. You know, for me being a gang guy, I call them all gangs, but some sort of organized crime or organized situation allows the narcotics to enter into our homes.
And Lisa, for your community, is it a little bit different to look at heroin versus the prescription painkillers, as far as how they're coming in? And
oh, absolutely. With the painkillers, you know, they were originating from within our county, and they were legal. And so our law enforcement had a very hard time dealing with that. That's a very difficult crime to prosecute or do anything about. However, heroin is not indigenous to our county. It has to be brought in. So we realized early on when this transition was taking place that it was going to be vitally important to involve the State Highway Patrol, because the heroin was going to have to be brought in by vehicle. And so they became a really key partner, and they've done an excellent job intercepting that drug on its way in. Now, they can't catch it all, and you know, criminals are very clever and they find other ways to get it there, but their drug seizures have gone up about 500%.
We've got to love our law enforcement partners. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about prescription drug monitoring programs, and I just want to circle back a little bit more because I think it can be a solution. How are some of the ways that we can improve upon that system?
Well, I think one thing is that doctors have to learn to be more sophisticated users of prescription drug monitoring systems, in which they can see who's abusing the system, who's getting multiple prescriptions, whether a person has an increased supply over what they think is medically necessary, so that they can track who the outliers are, who the possible diverters are, and be more educated prescribers.
And if we improve that system, what will be the impact on heroin use?
I think in general, if we decrease opioid addiction overall, a part of what will improve will be heroin addiction. I think that opioid addiction is primed, and the pump is primed by the prescription drug problem. So limiting the supply, I think, can only help. It won't solve the problem, but I think it will help.
I think that's a really important point. Thank you, Doctor. There is a stigma associated with addiction. We always talk about that. But is there a particular stigma with heroin, do you think, Mark?
There is. There is. I think you sometimes hear parents say when they hear the H word, my kid is using what? They're so surprised, they're so ashamed, they're so devastated, and that's to be expected. It is such a horrendous problem. But they might not have known what's gone up to that. They may not have adequately tracked what's happening with their kid prior to heroin. But one thing that actually is happening as a historical trend is that heroin use, heroin addiction is now showing up as an earlier phase in the trajectory or drug-using career of young people in a very scary way. What we've seen now in the last decade, which we never would have seen 30 years ago, is a young person presenting for their first episode of medical attention when a parent finds them overdosed and blue in the basement, and mom and dad didn't even know they were drinking beer and smoking marijuana. Just because the time between first initiation of any illicit substance in heroin is now compressed, again because of the increased access, the increased purity, and the lower price.
And it's
very
accepted.
Scary.
Drugs are accepted. Well, we all tried some sort of drug when we were kids, and that's, it's okay. He's on what? Heroin. Oh my God. Now we need to address it when it's something that should have been addressed a long time ago.
True, but if it is a call to alarm and it does promote action, well, then that's a good thing. So I want people to be alarmed. Be scared, be very scared.
This is a good time for us to talk about education. Education, is key to any prevention effort. So let's go back to the Cleveland area to see how a coalition there is raising awareness about heroin.
I don't think that kids understand that when they're taking Oxycontin, oxycodone, an opioid prescription medicine that's not theirs, they're exposing themselves to risk of heroin use. So we're seeing a shift in kids and adults starting to use heroin as a replacement and really to feed the addiction, not so much because they want to take heroin and because they want to get the high. It's really to just help them because they are now addicted to an opioid.
The leadership of CAPA, the Community Awareness and Prevention Association in Brecksville, Broadview Heights, Ohio, began talking about heroin use after 5 people died from an overdose in a nearby community.
People were scared. They were worried that their kids were going to be exposed, could die. So we wanted to not only take the opportunity to educate them, but to assure them that we can make a difference by being proactive. We put that information out there directly by meeting with parents. We also sent email blasts with information from the National Institute of Drug Abuse. We had links to videos and to other research that folks could get the information, and we also made ourselves available to answer any questions of our parents and our community members if they had any other concerns or what to do. We provided them information on how to have those talks with their kids, so talking points that they could start conversation.
The coalition also began communicating with other community leaders.
It's a multi-tiered approach. You can't just do it by working with kids, working with parents. We have to work with our governments. We have to work with our hospitals. We have to work with the recovery community. We have to, help people who are addicted.
Heroin is an alarming drug, and there's a fine line between helping and scaring.
You have to be careful how you put the information out there because you don't want to scare people. At the same time, you want to be honest. So it's all about how you wrap the information, how you present it.
Well, we were talking about sort of actually scaring people a little bit. Be scared. This is something really scary. But there is a fine line, and people might think that it can't happen to my kid, right? So, Lisa, how are you, as a public health professional, educating your community?
We've been really lucky in that we have a very dedicated newspaper that gives us very positive coverage, but also delivers news in a factual manner. And so we have used the newspaper to make sure that people understand the significance between the opioid pain pills and the heroin that's coming in, that one thing actually did lead to the other. And also we work with our schools and our youth organizations to reach parents and teachers and educators and people like that so that they can understand what this addiction is and can be on the alert for any signs of that in an individual so that it can be addressed, you know, very early in their experimentation before it led to addiction.
Mark, that's a good point, early intervention. Is that, how can that help address the heroin problem if we get to people early enough?
Well, the three pillars of turning around any drug epidemic are education and interdiction, which we've talked about, and treatment. So we've got to be able to link those things together, and treatment is essential, treatment works, and the earlier the better. So if we can get to kids early before they progress from other substances to prescription opioids, that's a start. If we can get them before they progress from prescription opioids to heroin, that's another point of intervention. But if we get them when they're on heroin, we still have really good treatment, and I think we should talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely, and we're going to get into the treatment piece. One intervention piece I want to just talk about briefly is needle exchange, and your community is doing that. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, about a year ago, faced with some statistics that we just could not ignore, a quadrupling of hepatitis C rates in just a 4-year period of time, highest overdose death rates in the entire state. We were forced to make some tough decisions as a health department, and so we did implement a syringe exchange program in an effort to cut down on the spread of hepatitis C. At that time, we had a couple of innocent little children that were stuck by some needles and consequently contracted a potentially fatal disease. And so with the syringe exchange program, we work with addicts. Naturally, they're IV drug users. Everything's very anonymous. We don't usually know their name, but we engage them in safe practices. We also have the opportunity then to engage them in talking about treatment, helping them into treatment, addressing some of the health problems that they have.
So this can be a pathway to treatment.
Absolutely.
That's important.
In fact, I think that's the big value of needle exchange and other kinds of interventions that try to meet addicts where they are, is to engage them. That's such a critical word, and give them a path to recovery as they get interested and as we try to motivate them.
So Mark, let's talk about treatment options. I think that's really important for people to understand what is possible for people that are addicted to heroin or painkillers.
Sure. So the first thing that is a critical aspect of treatment is most opiate addicts, most heroin addicts will need detoxification. We talked about withdrawal. We talk about how addicts will be sick. So in order to prevent those severe symptoms, we use a variety of medicines to get people through that sickness, and we call that detoxification. But it's important to know that detoxification alone is not adequate treatment. So people who go through what is sometimes disparagingly called the revolving door of detox will again typically relapse unless they're engaged into some kind of continuing care that involves them in relapse prevention. Just detox is not alone. So we have a whole bunch of different kinds of tools, and that includes both psychosocial counseling and therapy tools, and also some very potent medication tools. We sometimes call those relapse prevention medications, relapse prevention pharmacotherapy. You may have heard the term medication-assisted treatment. I like to call it medication-assisted recovery. But in any case, knowing that there are very effective medicines that can help people stay off of opioids over the long haul.
And what's the history? How long have these medications been around and been available for?
So the good news is we've known about effective opioid treatment, relapse prevention medications for 50 years with the advent of methadone, and we have a very solid history of good data about the effectiveness of methadone. Lots of controversy, pros and cons, side effects, as there is with any medicine. Even a Tylenol is bad for you under the wrong circumstances, but methadone really has proven for adult addicts to be the most effective treatment that we have when combined with counseling and other modalities. So as we now confront an epidemic of youth heroin addiction, we're trying to learn from the model of more adult-style treatments and treatment approaches, including medicines, and see if we can adapt them to youth. Now, that's been controversial. There isn't as much information, there isn't as much data, research data on effectiveness, there isn't as much research data on safety, but kids are dying. And so we've got to do something, and there just has not been a coherent national response.
But you did a study on that, right?
So I've been involved in a number of studies. Other physicians and researchers around the country have been looking at this increasingly and seeing that if you use certain medications, one of them called buprenorphine, you may have heard of that, a brand name Suboxone, that you can effectively help kids stay off of heroin and prescription opioids. We've looked at another medicine called extended-release naltrexone, which is an injectable medicine, which is an antagonist or a blocker, or we sometimes call it a turner-offer of the opioid receptor. And there's some preliminary evidence in adolescents and young adults that that's also an effective enduring treatment. Again, taking things we know about in the adult population and trying to adapt them to more youth-friendly, developmentally appropriate treatments for kids, which is a hard thing.
And so these different treatment options, does it really just depend on the patient? On which option would be best for them? How do the doctors decide?
Sure, so that's very tricky, and we don't have all the information about how to choose medicine A or medicine B. My initial impression, my initial approach to patients is try something. It's better than no treatment. You've already failed no treatment. I see kids who've relapsed before, who've had difficulties, who've come close to dying. Try an approach that includes counseling, that includes medicines. If that doesn't work, we'll switch up the medicines and try something different. And we'll never stop trying. One of the things that's very, very important is this notion of enduring longitudinal engagement. It's very hard for parents and policymakers and the kids themselves to get their heads around this, but you don't get fixed overnight from this problem. Just because you're detoxed, just because you get out of rehab or whatever, and you're motivated, the rates of relapse are so high that it's very important to engage patients and their families over the long haul. Keep with it, stay in touch, stay monitored, stay on medicine, stay with counseling, because there's trouble ahead.
Harold, how do addicts rationalize their heroin use?
They don't rationalize it. They need it. One of the things that came up, it becomes a medicine. It's something that I have to have. Once I'm hooked, it's something I have to have. But one of the things I want to say, and I'm listening to this, is we are investing a lot of money in the treatment for substance abusers. We invest a lot of money in prisons. We're investing a lot of money after the fact. I think a bulk of the money should be invested before the fact. When I was a youngster in junior high school, there were enormous amount of information given to us regarding drug usage and gangs and so forth. And we tend to get away from the preventive, stop it from happening before it happens. And then we wait till it happens, then we invest all this money into all these things because it affects all of our lives. I think we should invest. You know, I often say, how many cells does it take for you to have cancer? If you go to the doctor and say, hey, doc tells me you got 1 cancer cell, come back and see me when you got 20 or when it's out of control. No, we need to deal with it before it happens. Right. And it takes and I don't know if we're going to go here or not, but I think this is very important, that it takes everybody. It takes the community who doesn't even have kids. It takes law enforcement. It takes the doctor's office. It takes the news stations. It takes everybody to engage our young people to prevent them from becoming heroin users or cocaine users or marijuana users. We flip the script so often. And I'm talking about since I was a kid, this thing has changed so often. We start to invest all of our money on the back end.
Right.
So now my kid is dying. I don't want your kid to die.
No.
we need to invest a lot of this and let these kids understand the rules of engagement before.
You couldn't say it better. This is total ringing endorsement for coalitions, Harold. Thank you, because that really is, it's part of it is understanding, really. I think our increase, as we know more, Mark, about addiction, we're able to have conversations with people about the science of addiction, about genetics, about, predisposition, that can help with that prevention message, because just say no, is an old slogan from the 80s that we don't use anymore. But when we educate people, and Lisa, that's really what you're doing in your community. So how important is it that we bust the stigma down, that we get out in front of the problem? I mean, how important is prevention for you?
Well, I think it's very important, and I think that was one of the things that made my county so successful, because we had such a high proportion of people that had been affected by this through their own kids becoming addicted, yet they had no platform. They had some were even ashamed to come forth, and eventually when everyone started coming out and saying, well, my kid, and then there was more, well, yeah, my kid, then that just gave that eliminated the stigma, and that allowed for everyone to come out and say, okay, this is major, this is really major. We need to do something about this. And so it actually kind of helped us to get people more engaged by eliminating that stigma.
One thing that you talked about that I think is so crucial is linking law enforcement with treatment, bringing different modalities together in a coordinated effort. And so when people are addicted, their judgment is hijacked and gone. They may not see the necessity of wanting to get well. One of the things that law enforcement and interdiction can do is push them towards treatment and mandate treatment. That connection is so important, because we know we can get people better, but we need to have a force that pushes them into treatment so that they will do it even when they don't initially want to.
And I think one of the most important things is you take an ex-addict and you let that ex-addict walk these young people through how they initially got started. Did it happen was my marijuana laced, or was my liquor laced, and then all of a sudden I wanted more and more and more. And that's a game that some of these drug dealers play, is they'll play on the small drug, the marijuana, and then you want more and you want more. And I think the best person to tell you how not to use drugs is a drug addict, an ex-drug addict. You can't tell me how to get a good job if you've always had a job.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think messengers are really important. And some folks might say, well, look at this person in recovery, that they got through it, I can do it too. So they talked about the fine line between scaring people with messages, or how do you deliver the right messages? Lisa, what do you think?
I think that a lot of it is just going to depend on your audience and the age of the audience and the stage of, whether they've already experimented, or whether you're dealing with kids that are at more risk than others, or have lived in a household where maybe every day is scary to them because their parents are addicted and they've grown up just seeing this. And so we use a variety of techniques. We actually use some self-esteem building kinds of tactics with just regular kids. But then kids who have found themselves in alternative schools or something like that because they have become substance users, can benefit from people that have gone down that path and can tell them where it leads.
Mark, let's talk a moment about the public health message around pain, because I think we talked about this pathway from painkillers to heroin. How do we have a message about helping people understand legitimate pain and medications for that, and some of these associated problems?
Well, part of it is a problem in medical practice, and so I apologize to some extent for my profession that I think has erroneously overdone over the last decade the pain treatment on demand. Of course, we want to treat people who are in pain, and we don't want to let people needlessly suffer, and opioid analgesics, these pain relievers, are the best invention since sliced bread, since we discovered the opium poppy 10,000 years ago. When you have a car accident or surgery, you need opiates, don't get me wrong. But I think because we have overdone it and perhaps not been responsible about understanding the side effects of opiates, and that people will easily get addicted, especially if they have vulnerable histories in their background and risk factors, we just need to be more careful about that. One of the things that's hard to deal with for physicians are the demands of patients as consumers walking into the office and saying, you know, I've been on this much Vicodin for this many years, and I demand that you refill it, and I demand that you not take me off, and I don't care what you think about my safety and my risk, just give me more. Well, it's hard to say no to those patients, and it takes work, but we have to educate doctors to do a better job about judiciously saying, wait, I know better, there's side effects to these medicines, let's do something different.
So prescriber education is really, really important.
And molding physician practice and training, yes.
So do you guys think an increase in heroin use, though, is inevitable?
Right now, I think right now in our current conditions, yes. Right now, the way it is right now, yes. And it's merely based upon the information that the doctor just gave out. Once you start putting limits on the amount of medicine you can give, well, I can't get this Vicodin, I can't get this Oxycontin. Michael has something for me, some heroin, and that's where I'm going to go. And I may start snorting it, or I may start smoking it, and eventually that's not going to be enough. So under the current conditions, it's going to increase unless we do something on both ends, with the doctor as well as with the dealer. And prosecution is important.
I'd like to add something to that, too. I think that under the current conditions, you're right, because we do have, I think that this epidemic is different than the heroin epidemic before, because what we have now is a whole new gateway that is a legal gateway, and the legal gateway is prescription opioids. And, you know, they've only been allowed to be used widely in the community setting for the last 15 years. That's right. And that's when we saw this happen. I was a nurse in the 1980s where narcotics were very restricted. We had very few addicts at that time. And like I said, we had about 2 heroin addicts that probably came from the metro area.
Times are different, definitely.
Now,
times are different.
Now, you know, we have prescription opiates acting as a gateway to heroin. So yeah, I think that we're going to see it get worse and worse and worse until the original, you know, like Mark said, you know, we figure out a way to rein that in.
Okay, great. Well, I can't believe we're running out of time, but we have time just for a brief final thought. What would you like to leave the audience with, Harold?
It's not just the drug addict's problem, it's everybody's problem. And it's going to take everybody, law enforcement, the coalitions, the community who doesn't even have kids in school, the principals, the religious institutions. That's what it's going to take.
It's going to take us all. Mark?
Well, I'd like to end with a message of optimism. Treatment works, but hope alone is not an adequate treatment. If we just wait and hope that kids will stop on their own, kids will die. So we need to get kids into treatment. We need to identify community resources for treatment. And those resources should include physicians who know how to use relapse prevention medications, because those are an essential tool to getting people better.
Lisa, thank you. Any final thought?
I essentially agree with both things that they said, and I also would like to add that coalitions are an excellent tool to engage all of the people that they talked about, but also the community, because the community in the end has to be the one that owns and fixes these problems.
Absolutely, and that's a perfect place to end, and I want to thank our panel and thank all of you for watching today. This highway to heroin, together we can address it. As we close, we're going to share with you some important resources. Thanks for watching.